Hello, I'm Walter Koroshetz, the Director of the National Institute of Neurological Disorders and Stroke, and I'm pleased to deliver the Council's Director's Report. I want to start off by mentioning how proud we are of Dr. Richard Ewell, who is an intramural investigator and received the Breakthrough Prize for his work in Parkinson's, elucidating a quality control pathway that clears damaged mitochondria and thereby protects against Parkinson's disease. Thanks so much, Richard. I want to next go, as I usually do, to our budget. As you can see, our budget has increased substantially over the years, particularly in 2020. But in 2021, we had a much decreased increase. And this led us to decrease the pay line down to 14 percentile. Our budget, however, did include considerable funds for the Brain Initiative. Part of that money comes from the Cures Act, and also the HEAL Initiative to help end addiction long term. These are funds for projects, and NINDS distributes these funds around the Institute in pursuit of the goals of the Brain Initiative and the HEAL Initiative. The 2022 President's budget will be released at the end of this week. And so for 2022, we are not sure of what our budget will be at this point in time. I do want to point out that we are always caught between funding grants at the budgets that they come in with, and on the other hand, funding as many grants as possible, as many investigators as possible. What we've seen over the last couple of years is that there's been an increase in the average cost of the R01, and it's now up to $559,680 for our average NIH R01. The modular grants, which were set back in 1999 at $250,000 direct cost, has not increased over the years, although we did take away the administrative cuts to the modular grants starting in 2019 and then finishing up in 2021. So there are no more administrative cuts to modular R01s. However, the budget for the modular R01s was set, as I said, back in 1999. It hasn't changed. What we've seen lately is a steady decrease in the number of modular R01s. So back in 2011, the majority of the grants that came in were modular R01s, and now considerably down, and it's a significant minority of the grants are modular R01s. So we'd like the Council to think about this from 2 points of view. One is, what is the actual cost to do research that was in 1999 packaged as a modular R01? How much money does it cost to run a modular R01 science project? And the question is, should we incentivize such modular applications? If we could set the funding at a reasonable rate, is that something that we should incentivize in the sense that it would meet the goals of the original modular R01s, was to focus attention of the investigators or institution and peer reviewers on the science rather than on the budget details, make it administratively easier, but also would it be something that we could potentially have, say, 2 pay lines for, one for a reasonable modular R01, and then another pay line for grants that are above that cost, depending on what our particular situation is in a given year with regard to our budget. The idea, again, is trying to increase the health of the neuroscience enterprise by funding as many investigators as possible, keeping that science bubbling up in as many different areas as possible. So something to consider. Currently, the thought was that the Modular R01 budgets now are probably not high enough to move in that direction of a dual pay line, but we are thinking hard about how we can try to get back to incentivize grants that are at a somewhat lower level than what we've seen in the growth in the last couple of years. I want to now turn to the impact of COVID-19. Certainly, it's been a tragedy across the country in terms of health, but also the scientific enterprise has taken serious hit. In 2020, the NIH did a survey of over 45,000 researchers, and just a couple of things I wanted to present to you. As you can imagine, the pandemic had a significant effect on people's sense of their career trajectory. And that negative impact, which is substantial across really all segments of our investigators, but it was worse in those who are postdocs, so they are people looking for jobs. It was also worse in people who are early on in their career in a faculty position, less so in students, less so in scientists who are not the principal investigators, and less so in very established academician scientists running labs for many years. They also asked about the gender effects, and this was looking at both men and women and those who had dependent care due to young children. And there, it's pretty much the same between men and women. Similarly, in looking at those who had to work with dealing with, say, parents or other family members during COVID and caretaking, again, the men and women are pretty much the same. The difference was in the responses to the ability to actually get a substantial amount of work done. The women felt it was much more difficult to complete work responsibilities than did the men. And certainly there has been a very significant worry that the pandemic may have affected women scientists to a greater extent. We did look at a couple of trends in terms of whether there was an effect on the number of applications to be submitted. And what you can see here is that in actual fact, for trainees, the number of applications to submission periods has actually increased since the pandemic. So we have not seen a drop off in applications from trainees. If we look at female PIs, we did not see any drop in applications until the last submission period, April of 2021. That was where we saw a drop off. We had actually seen increases before that, so we have to keep a steady eye on that because of this concern, as stated here, that there is concern that disruptions may have had greater impact on women scientists. What we did see, and this is very disconcerting, is that initially there was an increase in applications from underrepresented minority PIs to R01 pool, but then there was a drop off in the September-December receipt date, and there was another further drop off in the January to April receipt date. And there has been, again, voiced concern that the negative effects of the pandemic and the social turmoil may have taken a greater effect on underrepresented minorities. And we'll see in a couple of slides from now, this is a serious problem for NINDS, where our numbers are really quite small. Now we have, as mentioned in the past, a number of actions to help particularly trainees or people caught in transition during the pandemic. So trainees in their last year of NIH fellowship, an F grant, or NIH Career Development Award, a K award, who have been impacted by COVID-19 can request paid extensions. Investigators affected by COVID-19 are encouraged to submit requests for extensions of ESI status. Fellows who have children while supported by an NINDS F32, either through childbirth or adoption, can request a 6-month paid extension to their fellowship. And most recently, NRSA fellows, those on F grants, can request support for child care costs up to $2,500 per budget period in new and continuing applications or as administrative supplements to existing awards. And this is new as of just last month. I'm now going to turn to the science of COVID, and particularly what we call the post-acute sequelae of COVID infection. So this was an infectious disease, affected primarily the lung, but then multiple other organs could be involved by COVID. Now, in contrast to, say, the flu, what was discovered almost a year ago was that many people were not recovering as you would expect from, say, something like the flu, and there were persistent symptoms. And now we have seen some of these folks go on with persistent symptoms 6, even 7 months out from their acute infection. And so it's really important for NIH to take on the study of this condition and try and understand what is its cause and how one can treat it. What this slide shows is that many of the prominent symptoms that cause trouble are neurologic in origin: fatigue, excuse me, memory and word finding difficulties, concentration difficulties, trouble making quick decisions, trouble with sleeping. Patients have described almost like a switch has gone off and they forgot how to sleep. Multiple different pain syndromes, muscles, joints, chest, abnormal sensations, tingling in the extremities. Headache can be very common in this group. Postural orthostatic tachycardia and autonomic trouble, where the heart rate is racing, palpitations occur, abnormal smell and taste due to involvement of the nasal mucosa, and a number of other issues. Also, cardiac and pulmonary and mental health disorders. COVID was a tremendous stress, and one can only recognize that post-traumatic stress disorder will be coming in its path now. Anxiety and depression, people who developed COVID, potentially other people in their family also had COVID. Some may have died. People who had an acute infection were extremely worried whether they're going to survive. And now months later, they're still not better. These are tremendous stresses on any individual. So NIH has talked to and been asked to discuss this with Congress, and Congress has appropriated $1.15 billion to try and understand this problem. The data is thin, but there have been a number of reports from Europe, for instance, looking at hospitalized patients, where 50% of them still are having symptoms at the 3 or 4 month period. This is a study from the Veterans Hospital. It's an electronic health record study, and they're looking at new diagnoses that are occurring after a month of the acute infection has subsided. And there what you see is that these symptoms, arrhythmias, bradycardia, anxiety, depression, memory problems, they are way over what one would expect from a normal population in the Veterans Administration. And the purple bars are those who are in the intensive care unit, the orange bars, those in the hospital, and then the green bars are all the positive cases. And what you can see is that all these symptoms are much worse the more severe the illness. But surprisingly, the big surprise of COVID is that there are many patients, and these are the majority of patients, who are having persistent symptoms despite not having been hospitalized. So these symptoms are more common in people who were hospitalized, but there are more people who were not hospitalized, and they are also having symptoms, although at a less frequent a less frequent rate. So the program that we're about to launch is to try and understand the clinical spectrum and the biology underlying recovery from acute COVID infection. Why do some people recover quickly compared to those who don't recover at all or recover much more slowly? What is the natural history of those persistent symptoms? Are there conditions that we are going to see more commonly, or maybe hopefully less commonly, in those who develop COVID if you look over 5 to 10 years from now? For people who are interested, there will be a listening session June 2nd to hear from the NIH folks, and for the NIH folks to hear from people who are suffering from these symptoms. And we have a website for folks who are interested to ask questions at recover.nih.gov. Next, I'd like to turn to our strategic plan, and this was a tremendous effort, incredibly thoughtful work done by our staff with outreach to many of you. And the strategic plan is now completed. And hats off to Dr. Nina Shore, the Deputy Director, who was the lead for this plan and put together some tremendously important document. And also hats off to Christine Torborg from the Office of Science, Planning and Policy, who worked so hard on this project. The strategic plan is up on our website, and the web team has done a great job in making it incredibly readable. So I urge folks to look at this and to give us input. The goals are to, first of all, perform the highest quality, rigorous, and important neuroscience research. This requires a vibrant research community, so training and diversity of our community is paramount. The research is important only after it is communicated to all the stakeholders, whether they be the scientists, those suffering with neurologic diseases, the general public, or to Congress. And for NINDS to be an efficient steward of the taxpayers' funding requires a very healthy workforce culture in which people who work at NINDS can feel the fulfillment that comes from supporting our mission. Next slide. There are a number of cross-cutting strategies that go across the various aspects of the plan, rigor and transparency being paramount, as mentioned. We talk in the plan, and we've thought about this, and this will come up over the years, and how best to balance investigator-initiated research, which has been the driving force for discovery in neuroscience, and team science, something that is much more favorably looked at, particularly by younger scientists coming out of training. The thought that they would like to work together on large projects, large, important, impactful projects in a team science mode, something that the physicists have learned to do, but yet is just beginning in neuroscience. The BRAIN initiative was really our first foray into this team science approach to big problems that could not be figured out in any individual laboratory. And so there's a place for this, and we have to figure out how to nurture it so that it can lead to the type of achievements that, say, we've seen in the team projects in the BRAIN initiative. Data sharing and data science, incredibly important. Looking for technological solutions and response from the community so that the research that we fund is available to all scientists around the world. Experimental models for neuroscience research have always been critical, whether it's the frog or the transgenic mouse, and certainly in some things there is no way of solving problems except for working with non-human primates. And we want to emphasize the need for all these models that are best for the problem at hand. We have learned from the BRAIN Initiative the importance of developing neurotechnologies, giving the scientists the ammunition they need to attack the problems that they're most interested in. And so not only technology development, but making these technologies accessible. As mentioned earlier, diversity and inclusion in the workforce is what's going to give us health over the long run. We have made recent attempts to highlight neuroethics in our research, and this is also emphasized in the strategic plan going forward. Patient engagement is another area that has received greater attention. We do work particularly on the disorders side of NINDS's portfolio to bring solutions to patients and their caregivers. And this we think can be best done by a closer alliance between those with the lived experience and the investigators. So they'll be working on operationalizing that as we go forward. Collaboration and partnership with the other neuroscience institutes has been very much a part of NINDS. The Blueprint for Neuroscience is a good example of that, but also partnership with industry, with disease advocacy organizations, and not to leave out the importance of the intramural program and the unique resources that they have to advance our mission. So the next steps are to operationalize the plan. This is a little different than what you see in many strategic plans, in that it has real actionable items, some of which are focused on the extramural community. Some of them are focused on NINDS as an institution and a federal agency. And for most of the major call-outs in the strategic plan, committees have already been formed to try to advance those recommendations. So just a couple of examples. We are establishing communities of rigor champions and launching a consortium to develop and validate rigor promoting resources and best practices. We're identifying new ways of communicating the values of basic neuroscience research to the general public. We're launching focused planning efforts in priority areas such as health equity research and data science. We're identifying opportunities to operationalize patient engagement in our clinical research. We're in the midst of evaluating our NINDS clinical trial networks and launching a new network for gene therapy for ultra-rare neurogenetic disorders. And we're working with the NIH Unite initiative, which I'll talk about in a second, to improve diversity in our workforce, eliminate racial bias, promote health equity. And in all of this, we're trying to become a better place to work with a stronger and healthier workplace culture that will, again, help to advance our mission. The Unite program is NIH's commitment to develop new ways to support diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we have many of our staff working with the Trans NIH program, and we have a number of goals that the Unite has put out there that we are also taking stock in. So we're publicly committed to identifying and correcting any policies or practices that may have helped to perpetuate racism or racial bias of any sort. We're trying to enhance the recruitment of underrepresented groups in the science we do, as well as in our leadership at the Institute and in science administration. We're trying to improve the success rate in NIH grant funding that supports researchers from diverse backgrounds, and also trying to fuel the pipeline with really passionate scientists from underrepresented groups. And we're working with the Common Fund to launch new initiatives. The first award program is to do cohort hiring of scientists from diverse backgrounds into academic positions around the country. And there's a new program transformative research to address health disparities and advance health equity that is just coming out now from the NIH Common Fund. We have a very vibrant Office of Programs to Enhance Neuroscience Workforce and Diversity, led by Michelle Jones-London. And the goal there is to increase the applications for underrepresented groups, to enhance outreach and attract investigators to neuroscience that is part of the NINDS portfolio, and to support training and capacity building. We're also intent on rooting out bias in peer review and all other aspects of our funding decisions. The issue that we are facing is one of the entry into NINDS mechanisms for funding. 87% of the applicants are well-represented groups, only 6% from underrepresented groups, and the success rate is about the same, 5% of underrepresented awardees, 6% versus of applicants. What we have done recently is set out a notice of special interest for R01 applications from individuals from diverse backgrounds, including underrepresented minorities. And this will encourage a more diverse pool of PIs to contribute to NINDS research by submitting the applications. As you know, we have a program called Select Pay, where we pick grants that are considered high program priority. And this can be because the grant is studying an area that's incredibly important, or just, groundbreaking work that's high risk, but really important to do. Or it may be that the grant brings diverse perspectives to science that makes our science as a whole at NINDS here much healthier. And so those within 10th percentile of our pay line, we look whether they can be funded through this high program priority grant mechanism. The BRAIN initiative also is making inroads to improve diversity. There, unfortunately, diversity was even less apparent than it is in our regular R01 pool. So they have programs for diversity supplements, for a K99R00 diversity grant, and for an F99 K00 award. The F99 funds PhD students so that they'll have funds when they go to look for a postdoc. The BRAIN also has a new program, which is to fund minority serving institutions and idea state institutions to develop reagent resources for BRAIN cell type specific access and manipulation. So this is dissemination of the BRAIN initiative tools out to universities around the country, but hopefully this can be set up in these idea state or minority serving institutions. The BRAIN initiative has also included a new requirement in their grants, and that is a BRAIN plan for enhancing diverse perspectives. And this is a scoreable criteria now. Each applicant must submit their plan, a summary of strategies to advance scientific and technical merit of their application through expanded inclusivity. And I suspect that many of our other grants and those of other institutes will follow along with a similar program of asking for this in grant applications and including it as a scoreable component. Health disparities has been something that we've looked at for a long time and funded, particularly in the stroke area, research to bring out some of the causes of disparities and measures of disparities. But thanks to Richard Benson, we are now engaged in a strategic planning process that will include the previous type of work, but with greater emphasis on trying to develop interventions that will actually decrease disparities. And so there's a major planning conference going to occur in September called the Headway Conference. And we're looking forward to Richard's plans which will be presented to council hopefully maybe in September. So this Headway conference is September 22nd to 24th, and it will examine the health disparities and equities in neurological disorders. And with that, I'd like to end on a note that we are also doing some work in trying to message out, we think, of public health messages, particularly relevant today in today's world, in targeting high blood pressure in Black men between the ages of 28 and 45. Now, you might ask, why am I being so specific about this target audience? Well, it turns out that studies that we funded, studies that the other institutes have funded, have shown that Black men in the mid ages actually have the greatest disparities in their stroke and death rate and death due to stroke rates. We believe that the problems of high blood pressure in the brain blood vessels actually begins in mid-age, and most of the effort has really been focused on the older folks and trying to get blood pressure under control. We think that that's actually too late. So by focusing on the highest risk group, Black men, midlife, we think we can actually really make some difference. Now, to get to this target audience required real ingenuity, and hats off to our communications group for doing qualitative research and coming up with a campaign, which I think is very compelling, and a video, which I think you'll see is also very compelling.
This summer I'ma shine again. This summer I'ma do some things I never did. Live a life that I'm supposed to live. Wake up as the sun is rising and give thanks again. A different way of thinking, right? Open up new mind states, now it's clear what I believe in. This summer is a new day dawning. Hold on, it's a new day coming.
So I want to thank you for your attention. We covered a lot in the director's message. Looking forward to your feedback, either by asking questions here at council or sending me emails. We are striving to be transparent with our council, with our community as a whole, and look forward to your input. Thank you very much.